I sat at the table, intermittently checking my watch and the notes for my planned speech in front of me. It was now merely a habit. I knew the phrases I wanted to say by heart and had done so for several weeks. I was aware that what I was about to do posed a significant risk, but I felt forced to proceed. I lamented that it had come to this, but my stubborn husband had brought it upon himself. What options did I have? Was my hubby going to love what I had planned? Oh no, I knew he wanted to be in control all the time, and I was ready to take away all of his choices and bend him to my will. I leant back in my chair, awaiting his return home. He had no idea I had prepared an ambush for him. I know what you are thinking. I was going to sit him down and tell him I have a lover, then insist that he either accepts it or I dump his ass and clear him out. Well, you would be mistaken. I wasn't going to announce my divorce or pursue a trial separation just to screw with him. Before you ask, no, I didn't want to knock him out simply to tie him up and humiliate him by having an intimate relationship with his best buddy. And don't insult his credibility by claiming I was there to declare that I had discovered his affair and was heading for a revenge intimacy or 2. My hubby is the most caring, sweet, and faithful man I've ever met. No, this was another form of ambush, a more literal one. I looked across to my partner, Matt. He was 6 feet 4 inches of muscle and tattoos, and he stared at me vacantly from the bedroom doorway just inside the front entrance. I didn't choose him for his mental capabilities, did I? I checked my watch again. It's almost showtime. Right on schedule, I heard Dave's keys click in the front door lock. I nodded to Matt and watched him vanish into the shadows. I put on my brightest smile. Dave opened the door and, without looking inside, closed it behind him. He didn't look up until he had turned around and moved 2 paces closer to me. His face sank quickly. Karen, what are you doing inside my apartment? At that point, the aforementioned 6 foot 4 inch man mountain moved behind my husband and clamped the wet towel around Dave's lips and nose. I watched Dave struggle, horrified at how long it was taking. In the movies, individuals who were chloroformed passed out immediately. In reality, my spouse struggled, raged, and rolled his eyes. He tried to glimpse his attacker, but the massive motorcycle understood what he was doing. Dave must have changed tactics after at least 2 unpleasant minutes. He appeared to relax briefly before lifting his right foot and stomping down. I believe his objective was to strike the top of Matt's foot, but he misjudged. Instead, his boot skidded down the biker's shin. I winced at the mirrored pain as I, like M, was huge and foolish. Matt's plan was quickly abandoned. He released Dave with one arm, swung him around, and pounded a fist beneath my husband's chin. Dave saw it coming but was too drowsy to defend himself. Finally, I saw his eyes cross, and he sank onto Matt's arm. Ah well. Shame, but the result was the same. Matt and I lifted my reclining spouse and brought him into the master bedroom with precise coordination. 5 minutes and 4 ropes later, the task was complete. I thanked Matt and paid him the remaining $200 for completing the task. He pocketed it and trundled out the door, touching his pocket to ensure he still had his lockpicks. I sat on the side of the bed, gazing tenderly at my husband's face and touched his brow. Why did he become blue? I instantly realized that lying unconscious and on his back had caused him to swallow his tongue. I tried to pry open his mouth for unknown reasons, possibly to seize his tongue. It would only open a little. So I placed my hand under his neck and lifted slightly. I heard and felt air rush into his lungs. I gently relaxed as the color returned to his face. Now all I had to do was wait for him to recover from his Matt-induced swoon. It took around 5 minutes before his eyes began to twitch. I just sat there, stroking his brow. Finally, his eyes opened completely. Within seconds, he sprang skyward but was held back by the ropes. His head twisted from side to side as he looked at his shackles. Finally realizing he was helpless, he stopped thrashing and began crying help as loudly as he could. I had anticipated this, so I slapped him as hard as I could to temporarily shock him before reaching for the pre-prepared gag. I had hoped we might communicate like civilized humans, but if you are going to be unreasonable, a one-sided chat will have to suffice. When I finished tying the gag, I gazed back at the face I had loved for 23 years. I took a deep breath and pictured my notes in my mind. Now, sweetie, I began chatting. Something went wrong. Again. He seemed to be unconscious. Come on. I didn't slap him particularly hard. His eyes rolled back in his head and his body vibrated slightly. Thinking my slap had triggered something, I sat and watched at this strange behavior. In my panic, I felt I could repair what I had done by slapping him again. I leapt up and straddled his chest, returning my hand to administer my medication. I am sorry, sweetheart. This was not how it was intended to be. My body was thrown sideways as someone tackled me to the ground. I looked up and was surprised to see another woman. She was a little taller than me and quite attractive, with flaming red hair. She was a lot younger and clearly fitter. I was pinned to the floor in some sort of wrestling or martial arts grip, much like before my athletic physique had been allowed to run down a little. The strain around my throat barely permitted me to breathe. I knew a little more could change that, so I let my body relax and glanced up at her startling green eyes. Let me get up, B. I need to chat to my hubby. I will let you go, but not to speak to my boyfriend. I want to find out what's wrong with him. Try to interfere, and believe me, I will break both of your arms. I've contacted the cops, so whether you go or stay is irrelevant. Do you understand? The pressure lasted until I nodded in agreement. She sprang up and stared at Dave. His condition remained the same. She swiftly placed her head on his chest and listened. I spotted the color, grabbed my phone, and dialed an ambulance. As soon as she hung up, she grabbed a knife and cut Dave's ties, yelling at me to help bring him to the floor. I was beginning to panic. What's happening? I do not know. His heart beats irregularly. I can't perform CPR on the bed. What the hell have you done to him? A friend of mine knocked him unconscious. But he had to. Dave wouldn't come out of the chloroform. The tall redhead paused again, listening to Dave's chest. Why did you give him chloroform? Is this how you plan to get him back? Excellent plan. No, I know. He'll never take me back. Not after what I did to him. He's far too proud for that. 2 police officers raced into the flat, interrupting any more discussion. The Hellcat swiftly explained what had happened, and one of the police officers quietly apprehended me. As I was escorted to the door, I was overcome with fear, terror, and most importantly, frustration. I only wanted to tell him why. He needs to listen. He needs to forgive me. I was transported to the police station and detained in a holding cell for what seemed like hours. They'd offered to call a lawyer for me, but I knew I couldn't afford it. I'd spent almost all of my savings on divorce lawyers before accepting that Dave was gone for good. I was still afraid. What if Dave had died? Then I'd be unable to explain why I did what I did, and I'd never be forgiven by him. Finally, I was led to an interview room. 2 detectives sat me down and activated a tape recorder. I saw no danger in agreeing to be taped during the interview, but that was the extent of my participation. I refused to answer the first 3 questions I just answered because they will likely incriminate me. When the 2 detectives were contemplating hiring a legal aid lawyer for me, there came a tap on the door. A 3rd detective popped his head around the door. My girlfriend has arrived and will like to speak with me. With obvious terrible grace, the 2 initial detectives exited the room, and the tall redhead entered and sat opposite me. I'm Wendy Dormer, by the way. Is Dave okay? I asked. He'll live, no. Thanks to you. Your little chloroform trick caused him to have a heart arrhythmia. The doctors think he'll be all right until his heart rate rises above normal, at which point he will simply pass out. They'll let him rest for a time, then halt and restart his heart. There's a 90% probability he'll return to normal. Otherwise, he'll be on a pacemaker for the rest of his life. Relieved, I seized the opportunity to gaze at her. She was statuesque in a bimboish way, with a figure I would have loved to have at her age. One look in her eyes told me that, while she was physically superior to me, I had the cerebral advantage over her. I wondered why she was here. She answered it for me. Look, Karen, this stuff has to end. When will you realize that Dave doesn't care why you treated him badly? He simply wants a divorce and to go on with his life. But he has to listen to me, I said. No, he doesn't. You need to tell him. But there's no legislation that requires him to listen. According to what he tells me, you and he lived a normal existence until he returned home and discovered you screwing another man. He stated that, as far as he was concerned, you had opted out of the marriage and he wanted nothing more to do with you. He owes it to me to simply listen and understand why I did what I did. I know he and I are done, but he needs to forgive me after he moved out. I tried calling him, but he never responded. The emails disappeared into the void, and I never heard back. I sent him a letter, and he simply returned it unopened. I even tried a registered letter, but he refused to take it. God, this is so frustrating. I tried accosting him at work, but he just placed his finger in his ears and refused to listen, so I contacted security. I tried to explain it to his mother, but she simply called me a slut and hung up. I even tried to get my parents to interfere, but they said they no longer wanted anything to do with me. That hurt, but not as much as when my own children refused to speak to me. My final effort was to refuse to sign the divorce papers unless he sat down with me one-on-one. He simply interrupted the process. It is quite frustrating. If I could simply explain why I did it, we'd be able to move on and people would start talking to me. Again. What people? She asked. I responded. Yes, I can see how it would be frustrating. Let me tell you, Dave was disappointed by the youngsters' attitude. He tried to persuade them that they should not judge you, that the sins you committed were against him, not them. However, they are now adults and can create their own ideas. They're good kids, and they and my two get along great. When did you see them? Did you travel to Sydney? No. They were here last week, and it is the second semester break. She spread the word that my own children were in town, but they did not come to see me. Let it soak in. Look, Karen, if it saves Dave's life and stops you from committing this nonsense again, I'll gladly listen to you now. I pledged to try to get Dave to hear me out. I carefully examined her proposition. I looked at her innocent, slightly vacuous expression. What the hell? I had nothing to lose and enough to gain. The police had just circumstantial evidence, with Dave as the only direct witness. I knew I could count on his good nature not to file accusations against me. If this bee attempted to make a comment, I would simply refute it. Shit, I used to have two dumb pricks like her before breakfast every day at work. I decided to consult her on one of the minor arguments I had prepared. Okay, I was a virgin when we married, and I always wondered whether I was missing out on something. Yes, Dave felt it may be something like that. However, he said that you had insisted on marrying a virgin. He claimed he'd apply light pressure on you to give it up. He even admitted to having flagged it as a potential danger years ago. I agreed with him that using that as an excuse would be highly unjust given that you had the option at the time. Wendy's interruption took me by surprise. She was being a little more forceful than I anticipated. That was nothing compared to what she said next. And, don't attempt to persuade me that you were just getting back at Dave for playing away or neglecting you. The kids informed me that growing up, he was always attentive to you and spent all of his leisure time with you and them. Do not try to tell me that he cheated on you first. I know him well enough to state that he is the most dependable, trustworthy, honorable, and respected man I have ever known. He would never disrespect you, until you flung him away. This woman was starting to irritate me with her naivety. I knew my voice was louder and shriller than I intended. But I didn't care. That was the problem, right? Respect. I have a university degree, although Dave never finished high school. I clawed my way up the corporate ladder after taking a decade off to care for my children, and nobody said anything. Dave is promoted to foreman, and everyone assumes he's been elected president. I hang around with sophisticated business professionals who drive BMWs and dress up. Nice. He hangs around with sweaty, blue-collar yobs who drive Fords. He can eat whatever he wants, and still look gorgeous, whereas I can diet all day and still look like a fat middle-aged housewife even after a facelift and a boob operation. Everyone likes Dave. Everyone respects Dave. Everybody wants to be with Dave. I detest it. I hesitated, attempting to lower my voice below the shriek I knew it had become. Even after I was promoted to group manager last year, all my parents could say was that they expected nothing less after spending so much money on my studies. Nonetheless, they raved about Dave's bonus. I earned more in 3 weeks than Dave did in a year that wasn't fair. That year I spent a fortune on a hairstyle, cosmetics, and a dress for my company's holiday dinner. When I arrive, everyone asks, "Where is Dave?" Do you know what it's like to know you're socially, financially, and intellectually better to your husband, yet your own parents appear to prefer him over you? Wendy shakes her head. Karen thought Wendy was the person she despised the most. The sporty bimbo at school who had her pick of the lads, the vapid type who hung around with her husband at parties and smiled at his coarse jokes while attempting, but failing, to wow others with her education and intellect. They agreed with him whenever there was a point of contention, even when her argument was stronger. Not only women, but also men. The ultimate humiliation came when, after one argument, Dave defended her against the mob. The argument had been over stay-at-home mothers. Dave joined in and exalted her merits as a mother who had selflessly given up her early job to provide for her children. A kind and nurturing environment. His remarks on how well she looked after the ravages of 2 children should have brought them together, but instead had the opposite effect. The group manager must be rescued by a foreman. Well, after a while, I began to resent it. Every time I attempted to prove my superiority in any minor manner, it backfired. Just made me look competitive, and worse, it caused people to gather around Dave. In the end, I realized there was only one way to get one over Dave. I'd take a lover. If I could keep an affair from Dave, it would prove that I was better only for myself. If I could find a greater lover than him, who would give me more pleasure, I could humiliate him in secret, and he would have no idea. That wasn't that difficult, was it, Karen? Dave is so open and trusting that you could have screwed a guy in bed next to him, and he wouldn't have known. How long was this going on for, she asked. 3 guys over 6 months, I replied. Wow, Dave thought it was just the one. Was it what you were hoping for? On the whole, no. Sure, it was satisfying getting one over Dave and successfully hiding it. But the intimacy was awful. Because I was so inexperienced when I married, I had no idea that Dave was bigger and better than most men. The guys didn't give a shit about my pleasure. It was just wham bang thank you, Mom. I only went with the first two a couple of times. The third guy, who I worked with, was the only one even remotely up to Dave's standards. So, why didn't you give it up? She asked. Because if I did, then Dave would have won again. I felt I had to keep going until I had better intimacy with someone than the intimacy I had with Dave. Then I could have retired knowing I'd had better intimacy than Dave had ever had, and I could have stopped, knowing something Dave never would. I was training the third guy, John, up with everything I liked best. I could see this logic just wasn't registering with Wendy. Serves you right, B. You should have been concentrating at school rather than intimating the entire football team. So what happened in the end, Karen? What you are telling me now doesn't sit with what Dave told me. He figured you wanted to be caught. That was why he came home at his normal time and caught you having intimacy on the couch. Of course I didn't want to be caught. I knew that Dave would throw me out on my arse if he ever discovered me. I came to realize that John would never get me to where I wanted to be, so I came up with another plan. Dave had intimated with me a couple of times a few hours after I'd been with other guys. It was kind of hot, but still not what I wanted. I made the mistake of reading some stories about humiliation online. There was one about a woman who had her lover finish in her, then got her husband to eat her out a short time later. This story struck a real chord with me. I knew this was what I was looking for. If I could pull this off, my obsession would be over. No matter how inferior I felt from then on, I would remember Dave humiliating himself that day. So I took the Monday off and invited John to come over in the afternoon. The plan was for him to give me at least 2 good loads just before Dave came home. I set an alarm for 4.45, knowing that Dave always came home spot on 5.30. I was going to lie on the couch and invite him to dine when he walked in the door. Just my luck that for the first time in years he came home early without ringing. I stopped, realizing that in my anger and frustration, I had departed wildly from my script. He didn't actually come home early, Karen. If you'd gone to work that day, then you would have realized that you and Dave had forgotten the start of daylight savings the day before. He turned up to work an hour late but left at normal time. He said he'd rung and left a message on your cell, she replied. Shit, I responded. I'm not sure why you believed all of that was necessary, Karen. I've talked to Dave a lot about this and helped him recover, and he never gave me the feeling that he believed he was superior to you. In fact, he revered the earth you walked upon. When I spoke with your parents, they always seemed to be quite proud of you, save from this incident. Yes, I understand that now. I realized most of it was in my imagination, but it felt real at the time. That's exactly what I wanted to tell Dave all along, but he refused to listen. So you devised a small ruse to get him to listen to you. How were things intended to go? I broke into Dave's apartment and hired a friend of a friend to help me tie him up so he would be forced to listen. But when he arrived, the guy was supposed to chloroform him and help me tie him up, but the chloroform didn't knock him out, and he started to lash out, so my hired help had to knock him out with his fist. So Dave won again, didn't he? I lost my job, all of my friends and relatives abandoned me, and even my own children won't notify me when they're in town. Meanwhile, Dave becomes the victim. My reputation has suffered as a result of damaged items. If I ever want to go on a date, I will have to leave town. Dave gets women to line up just in case you and he break up. No way, Karen, I know gold when I see it. Now, back to your question. I have no intention of telling Dave about your warped logic for destroying his life. To be honest, I didn't comprehend a word of it, and all I could think about was how it was going to cause him additional misery. Maybe one day, when he's stronger, I'll trickle feed him. Who knows, she answered. As I was calling her a reneging S, I noticed she was twirling the index finger of her right hand in a circular motion while pointing it at the ceiling. The meaning of this became apparent when the door opened and the original 2 detectives re-entered the interview room. One walked straight to the tape recorder on the table, hit stop, and retrieved both tapes. Well done, Sergeant Dormer. An unusual tactic, but a plain confession of breaking and entering, assault, conspiracy, and unlawful restraint. We'll have to see how Mr. Brown goes after the operation to see what other charges we can come up with. Thanks, Rex. I know Dave will hate this, but the only way he will ever be able to relax after this is if this mad bitch is safely just before she got to the door. Karen. When you get out, please respect Dave's wish to never see you again. I was too bewildered to even answer. Shit, was I smarter than anyone? And that's the end of today's story. If you enjoyed it, please give this video a thumbs up and drop a comment below. Your support helps the algorithm push my content further. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Really helps me keep creating more stories for you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.